We are going to create our first form, and for that we are going to base ourselves on this table model. We are going to start with a very simple table, for example this one, that only has two fields, name and id. We go to Jhanu, we go to Settings and Services, and the first thing we have to do is define our connection pool with the database. In this case the model is in a PostgreSQL database, but Jhanu connects to any database that has a JDBC driver. Here I click on Add. I put an identifier to the connection, a description, I define what database it is, and now what I do is replace the URL. With the host where the database is located, and I change the name. I write the username and password. And how many connections are we going to enable for the pool? I'm going to make a small pool of 10 connections. I'm going to give it a test. The connection is working, and now I press the Save button. So I already have my first connection to the database. I close the window, and then we are going to add a new form. We are going to call this form Devices. The title that we are going to put the form is not as simple as putting a string all. The forms are internationalized in Jhanu, and therefore we have to define a string dictionary. And that's what we have here. So first I'm going to write the key for this dictionary. I'm going to put form_devices_title. I'm going to put it in English, and this is going to be called name, and I'm going to put this same field in Spanish. And I'll add it. Wait a minute, I'm making a small mistake. Here we are the title, so let's put it in Spanish. Let's put it devices. Devices in English. I save. And now what it's going to do is look for this label that we just put, and I click here. Once the title in the language that Jhanu is set to at the moment. Here I can put a description. I can establish a project. This is simply a grouping for the forms. Reports and services that we want to do. I am going to add a new project. This is going to be our example project, and the connection that we are going to use would be this one that we are using. This connection is useful when we want to retrieve the data from the database, but at this moment it is not necessary. I am going to leave it like this. I am going to tell it to show the title, and I am going to click Save. When we do this, these other tabs are already enabled. The first one that is enabled is the Form Fields tab. If I want to see a preview of my form, I click here, and this is what I have. I don't have anything, just the title, but then I'm going to start adding fields. We are going to hide this first field that corresponds to the ID, which is the primary key of the table. Because it will help us when we want to retrieve information and modify it. The name of the variable is going to be ID. I'm going to save it and immediately we already have it here. If I reload this screen, absolutely nothing happens. Now I'm going to add another essay, it's going to be a string. I'm going to put name as the variable name and a label. Here we have our dictionary again. I'm going to add a new one. We already had it, it's just going to change the title to name. In Spanish it's name. And in English, name. I save it, look for it and select it, so I already have the label. How big is this field? I can see here my database. I think we are with the wrong table, it is device type that we are doing. I am going to put that it will have a limit of 30. That it shows me the label and that it cannot be null. I click Save. And if I reload this, we already have our field here. Okay, we are going to correct this because it was definitely not devices but rather device types, and for that I come back here again, we add a new one. Let's modify it and we are going to change devices by device types. Click on Add. I have to delete the previous one and here in English. And delete the previous. I save it. We already have it as device types. This is how our form looks like. Now I am going to add an event to it, and this event is to save the information in the database. I'm going to add the first one called save. I can put another label on it. Remember that everything is internationalized. I'm going to copy it. I'm looking for it. I found it here. I am going to leave this event enabled and proceed to save. Once I have saved this event, I can start adding actions to it, but first I have to configure it. I have to configure this event, and in this event, I will configure the input data and specify that it comes from a form. The response will be in JSON format in UTF-8 and that the method that we are going to use is a message to save. The default language is Groovy, which is the only option, and I am going to configure it as a form button. I am going to give it OK. If I reload this, we already have our save button that does absolutely nothing, it just says data saved, but does nothing. So now what I'm going to do is establish what actions this event is going to execute. We already have all the configurations, but I am going to Establish the input variables to specify that there are two. These are the form fields. Okay, we haven't set an output yet. So let's select Save and start adding the actions. What we are going to do is save the information in the database. For this we have to establish a connection with the database. We open a connection. I can put a description. And here I have to save my connection in a variable. I am going to call it with the connection, and my connection is going to be the one that we had already established before. I can set it to be auto-commit. And now I'm going to add an additional event, which is going to be execute an SQL statement. And we write the SQL statement that we are going to use. I think by default this tool provides me with the SQL statements to insert. Data. I'm going to paste it here, and what we have to do is establish which variables are going to enter it. Now how are we going to insert data in table? By default its ID is an autonumber, so I'm going to omit the ID because this field will be automatically generated by the table. We are only going to add the variable that is going to give it its value. Default system variables, but name is the variable that comes in our form. In data type, I select string I add, and now the result of the operation has to go to a variable. We will call this variable JS on insert result, and the connection that we are going to use is the one that we had already configured. Now what we are going to do is close the connection to the database. This is important so as not to leave connections open. We choose which connection we are going to close. We save, and finally we can return this variable as the result of the operation. The result variable is this. This option is if I want to give an example of what the response would be like. Now that I have this variable, it is important to establish what the output of the service is. This is the HTTP code that will return on success. We already have our data here, and if I want to see the definition by Swagger, I click here and you can see that I already have this, and this is my endpoint, and of course all these interfaces are authenticated, and if I want them to be free then I have to set the permissions for this, but for the moment they require authentication and we will leave it at that. Now if we go into this table we see that there is absolutely nothing now. I go back to my interface and let's put a type of device. Let's say this is going to be a Windows, I'm going to save it. OK, and if I refresh, here I already have my Windows device and I can be entering more records. And of course we have our endpoint that should also work. I don't have the authentication key at the moment, and to obtain an authentication key I have to use the endpoints that the first endpoint called login is here. It gives me the authentication key and this one with my username and password. The problem is that this field is required, so we couldn't test it. This will be for another video. For now we have our first form as we see here, very simple, and what we are going to do later is start to fill it out.